Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello, and welcome to the ISO Show. At the end of the podcast today, you'll have an appreciation of the standard that certification bodies need to comply with, which is ISO 17021. So for those of you that are listening that work for a certification body, in theory, you should know this standard inside out because these are the rules on how to certify organisations and basically for providing audit and certification of management systems. For those of you that don't work for a certification body that are certified to an ISO standard, I'm going to be talking about what are the requirements of this standard and also the significance of this particular standard in the standards world. I am by no means an expert on this standard, which is why I've brought in Steve Mason, our managing consultant here at Blackmores, who does know about this standard in depth and has first-hand experience of this, both working for a certification body and also on the other side, being a consultant as well. So welcome back, Steve.
Hi, Mel. It's good to be back.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. I know you've been very busy with specifically on ISO 27001 projects and also transition for the new standard that came out last year.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very busy project at the moment.
Yes, yeah. So I think it might be worthwhile just providing some context in why we're recording this podcast right now. And it's down to the fact that each month as a team at Blackmores, we'll have a monthly team meeting. And on the agenda is certification bodies. So it's whether we have had any highs or lows in relation to our experience with certification bodies as a team. And it's an opportunity to flag up any issues on behalf of our clients. And there have been quite a few issues in recent months. And Steve brought up the subject of ISO 17021. And we started having a conversation about that in the meeting about the do's and don'ts of what certification bodies should and shouldn't be doing. And there was a suggestion, I can't remember, it might have been me, I can't remember, that said, I think it'd be really good to bring this subject to our ISO Show listeners. So here we are.
I don't think it was me that suggested it.
Yeah, no, I think it was me. I'm thinking, oh, crikey, hopefully we won't be falling out with any certification bodies at the end of this. But
yeah.
Anyway, here we go. Let's start with talking about what 17021 actually is. Would you mind providing some insight into that, Steve?
Okay, yes. I think to be accurate on this, there are a number of 17021 standards, and the one we're referring to is 17021-1:2015. Okay. And the reason for the standards is that it ensures that all certification bodies are delivering the same level of service to customers, or they should be. And it's also the standard against which I believe UCAS will audit a certification body. Now, we often get comments made by clients, why aren't the certification bodies certified to 9000 and other standards? And it's quite simply because they don't need to be. Their standard is 17021, and it's been built specifically for the purpose of delivering certifications. And it's a standard that you can go to and actually find out what is expected. It's almost like a kind of terms and conditions, a service level agreement, a contract that you have with your certification body. Yes, you'll sign your terms and conditions with them, but this is what lays behind it. And is such an important document, not just for certification bodies to have, but also for clients to have. Because there's so much in here that I believe, and I think we've realised, that is not being delivered by certification bodies and is actually quite seriously winding up customers in the field. And that's what we got to sort of highlight here today. So yeah, it's an important standard. It's what certification bodies get audited to from a UCAS, and it does set that level playing field. So you know that if you go to certification body A and then to certification body B and then to C, you should be getting the same level of service based upon this standard.
I think it's definitely worthwhile mentioning the difference between UCAS accredited certification bodies and non-UCAS accredited certification bodies before we delve into 17021 any further. I mean, I was having a conversation yesterday with a company who have basically outsourced all of their IT, data centers, IT managed services to an organization. And one of the questions I asked was, does that company have ISO 27001? Yes, was the answer. The next question I asked was, is that a UCAS accredited certification for 27001? Ah, what's that? How would I find out if they are or not? So that's when I went on to explain about the difference, and that UCAS accredited certification bodies have to basically follow a set of rules, which is ultimately 17021. And that's how you know that that is a legitimate certificate when it's got the crown on it, as well as obviously the whatever the badge is, 9001, and the name of the certification body. And those rules are there for a reason, aren't they,
They are,
Steve? I mean,
yes.
what would you say is the kind of the main reason for that?
I think the main reason is to know that the certification body is being checked by another body, So customers need to be able to trust their certification bodies, and how they do that is looking for that UCAS certificate. Now, UCAS is not the only accreditation body in the world. There are others around the world. There's ANAB, and certainly in America. If you go onto the IAS website, they will show you all the different accreditation bodies around the world. So that might be quite useful if you're an organisation that's working internationally. Now,
Oh, sorry, just to highlight that. So that's the International Accreditation Forum,
yeah,
and we can include links to that in the show notes then, just for our podcast listeners that might not be that familiar with that. So, yeah, that's basically the body that provide guidance on accreditation bodies. So, and each country generally has an accreditation body. In the UK, we're talking about UCAS, but obviously you mentioned about the American one, which is ANAB, and they're in pretty much most countries across the globe.
absolutely, absolutely. Now, there are a number of sort of certification bodies out there that do not have UCAS. I'm not saying to people you shouldn't use them, that's entirely up to them, but because it hasn't got that independent UCAS accreditation to it, you've got to then ask the question, is that a trusted organisation, sort of thing? Yes, they'll provide you a service, but will they provide you the same service and a consistent service that you should be getting from companies that are UCAS accredited? The other thing is with, obviously, those that are not UCAS accredited, there's no requirement for them to follow 17025. Sorry, 17021, get that right. Wrong standard. So there's no requirement for them to follow 17021.
Yeah. Okay, great. So in terms of 17021, ultimately what we're saying is that a certification body can't offer accredited certification services unless they've actually been assessed by UCAS to this particular standard, ISO 17021, and they need to do that on an ongoing basis like any other ISO standard. Is that right, Steve?
Exactly. Yeah, they'll be renewed against this, and also there's the other side of this is that just because an organisation is accredited to UCAS, it may not mean that every single one of their standards is accredited. So they might have 9,000, 27,000, and 20,000 accredited, but they may not be accredited to deliver 14, 45, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the thing you need to look into. Don't assume just because it's a UCAS accredited organisation, it will cover all standards. Okay, so it's a case of just finding the one that meets your needs and also meets your budget requirements. That's the important thing at the end of the day.
Okay, great. So can we just take a look at the standard itself then? And would you mind just providing an overview of what's included within the standard then, Steve?
I think the most important bit in the standard that companies need to be aware of is the process requirements, and that's in clause 9 of the standard. Like all standards, it's broken down into different clauses. A lot of the clauses before this are really about the management of a certification body. But when it comes to clause 9, this is where the customer becomes a lot more involved in the requirements, or should be a lot more involved, and sometimes they're not. There's the activities of pre-certification. There's about planning audits. Then there's about conducting audits. there's a certification decision making, there's maintaining certification, there's the appeals process, the complaints process, and then keeping client records. Now, all of those are key requirements that should be delivered to our customers. And that's what I would urge all clients that are certified by a certification body to make themselves aware of, is Clause 9 of this standard, because that sets down the requirements you should be expecting as a customer from your certification body.
Okay, that's great. So that's Clause 9. I've just opened up a copy of the standard actually so that I can take a look at myself. That's quite a meaty section, isn't it? Clause 9,
It is.
which is ultimately about in effect, like a service level agreement and what should be provided.
Yeah.
And it looks like the rest of the standards is basically about how to operate a certification body in terms of the principles. So it's covering impartiality, competence, responsibility, openness, confidentiality, responsiveness to complaints, and risk-based approach. So it's great that we've got some core principles in there, which other non-accredited certification bodies may not actually be able to demonstrate.
Yes, yeah, yes.
Then obviously we've got the legal responsibilities, the certification agreement, the structural requirements. So this is the organisational structure and top management and operational controls of actually running a certification body. And then we've got resources as well, which obviously you need people, processes, etc., and certain information that's required.
I think what's encouraging here is that when you look at Clause 10, it's very much like we would expect in our Clause 9 in 9000 or any other standard, where it's talking about management review, it's talking about internal audits and obviously corrective action. So it's very much laid out the same way as any other standard would be. It's just that perhaps the numbering is slightly different. So I think it gives a sense of encouragement that there is a framework to which our certification bodies should be working. And also it gives us a sense of encouragement that UCAS will be coming in and auditing against this to make sure it's compliant. I think one thing that's worth noting here is Annex D, because there's 5 annexes, and the one that's my favourite is desired personal behaviour. Now this is the list of personal behaviours that you should expect from your assessor.
I'm just going to take a look at that.
Yeah, the reason I highlight this is because I'm seeing more and more assessors that are not living up to the requirements of this standard. Now, is that the fault of the assessor? Is that the fault of the client because they're not exactly the most cooperative? Is it because new client managers, new assessors that are coming into the business aren't being trained effectively enough in this requirement, the standard? And often it's because this fails that there's a breakdown between customers and client managers, adding extra stress and unnecessary stress to both assessments and perhaps the relationships between the client and the assessor. So this is an area that needs to be looked at. So if we look at it, we've got a number of things there. Do we think that our assessor is ethical, and that's fair, truthful, sincere, honest and discreet? Are they open-minded? Now, that's one of my big bugbears, is that I often find assessors are not open-minded.
Okay, Steve, I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm going to ask for a story, if you don't mind. Obviously, you don't need to name names or anything, but it would be interesting
No.
to hear about a story there then. I'm just going to pick on one of these desired personal behaviours and your experience of that.
It often happens around risk assessment, and I've had assessors turn around and say things like, well, it must be wrong because I've never seen it done that way before.
Slay.
And that is not open-mindedness. And the assessor proceeded to raise a non-conformity. And I said, you can't do that. You've got to assess whether that risk assessment is effective, not whether you've seen it done before that way. You know, that's not what you're assessing against. And this tends to be the thing, is that the open-mindedness goes because assessors start assessing against their preferences and not against what's actually in the standard. And it's very, very clear in the standard that if you raise a non-conformity, you have to raise that non-conformity around something specific. It actually says in 17021, clause 9.4.5, audit findings, that a finding of non-conformity shall be recorded against a specific requirement,
Mm.
not against the assessor's preference, not because it's a certain day of the week or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's against a specific requirement, and that is my biggest bugbear, the open-mindedness. So
Yeah. I think we've all had experience of that as well, Steve. And I think just a little tip here for our iSocial listeners that aren't certification bodies. If you get asked a question and you give an answer and they raise that as a nonconformity, it's always worth, if you're not very clear on, well, why is it a nonconformity, to ask the assessor to show you where in the standard they're referring to that nonconformity. That it's as simple as that. It's
yeah,
a case of clarifying the question and verifying exactly what it is that the assessor is potentially raising a nonconformity against. And if there is a justification, there's a valid reason for that against that particular class, and that's absolutely fine. And, the assessor's doing a great job. But if not, if it's a personal opinion and why they've raised that nonconformity, and that's an opportunity for you to query that.
and don't get me wrong. I mean, when I was an assessor, I fell into that trap as well. I fell into the trap of sort of doing assessor preference because you're keen to sort of ensure that the customer is delivering the best or has the best management system in place. And it's only when you get challenged you then have to think to yourself, well, hold on a minute. Yeah, where does it say that in the standard? And you suddenly realise you've fallen into that trap of not being as open-minded as you ought to be. But a good assessor is an assessor that will stand back and say, you know what, I've got that wrong. Perhaps I'll just raise that as an opportunity for improvement for you to think about, rather than a non-conformity, because it isn't actually a non-conformity against the standard. I'd rather see an assessor change their mind than to be, blatant with, the mistake and carry on with it. So,
Yeah.
but all the other ones in this list all sort of fall in. You've got being diplomatic, being collaborative. One of the focuses when I was an assessor was partnership approach with customers. That seems to have gone out the window totally. And that's the collaborativeness. That has really gone. You still see it in the older assessors, those that have been in the business for a long time, but new assessors have got no idea and not being taught, or don't appear to be being taught this anymore. So I think most of the others are quite normal, sort of observant, perceptive, versatile, tenacious. Yes, we do see a lot of tenacity. But tenacity doesn't mean that your certification visit should go beyond 5 o'clock.
Mm.
Because we do see tenacity mean that some assessors are still assessing 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. I would say to clients, if you've got an assessor with you at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, tell them to go home. Because their visit should have ended at 5 o'clock. Okay, you've got a life to go to, you've got a home to go to. It won't affect your certification. If they need more time, then it's up to the certification body to work that one out.
Mm.
But you should not be there, because the only thing that happens if you're working beyond 5 o'clock is that you're going to get tetchy, the assessor's going to get tetchy, and you're not actually getting value out of your assessment.
Mm.
So that's what's important there. So all in all, I mean, when we look at this desired personal behaviour, Annex D, it is a classic one that all customers, or our customers that are certified, should have a copy of this. Make it absolutely clear that this is what they should expect from their assessors.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that, Steve. And I must admit, I don't think I've ever come across an assessor that's gone beyond 5 o'clock. In fact, on the flip side, I think quite a few of them have finished at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, that's another
But
one.
that's by the by. They might be doing the report writing after that, which I'm sure they will be. But anyway, yeah, thanks very much for that. It's been great to get an overview on why 17021 is so significant in the standards world and the importance of it to any organisation that's certified to an ISO standard for an ISO management system. I'd love to dive into the area that you mentioned about clause 9 in 17021, which is all about process requirements. So ultimately, that's service level agreement in terms of what a certification should be doing pre-certification. I think you mentioned about planning, conducting audits, and then the certification and maintaining certification. So if you don't mind, Steve, I'm going to invite you back onto the podcast so we can discuss that in a little bit more detail, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Yeah, look forward to that one.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining me, Steve. I look forward to catching up with you again on the next podcast. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed listening to the podcast, any feedback that you've got, then we'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to achieve certification to an ISO standard or just need a helping hand with ISO compliance? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com.